The first thing I saw wasn't the wolves. It was my phone vibrating violently against the kitchen table. I had just set my mug down when the motion alert exploded across the screen. One after another. My stomach tightened before I even unlocked it. Driveway camera. Front porch camera. Motion detected. I turned the volume up just in time to hear a woman shriek. "Oh my God, what is that?" Then a man shouting, panicked and sharp. "Get back in the car. Now. Now." I watched three large shapes move through the edge of the clearing, silent and deliberate, noses low, muscles rolling under thick fur. They weren't charging. They weren't aggressive. They were simply arriving. The couple on my screen froze like statues. That was the moment I knew my son-in-law had made a catastrophic mistake. Because he had sent his parents to my house without my permission. And he had assumed I would just take it. I didn't touch the screen. I didn't call anyone. I simply watched. The woman stumbled backward, nearly falling over her own luggage. The man grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the sedan they'd barely parked properly. Gravel sprayed as they fumbled with the doors. The engine screamed to life. Tirespun. The car reversed so hard it nearly clipped the mailbox before tearing back down the road. The wolves never looked at them. They went straight for the meat. I took a slow sip of coffee and leaned back in my chair. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "What did you do?" My son-in-law shouted the second I answered. I smiled softly to myself. "Nothing," I said. I moved to the woods. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had existed. I had been standing in a real estate office holding a set of keys that felt heavier than metal ever should. Outside the window, dry spring wind pushed dust across an empty parking lot. The woman behind the desk smiled like she'd just handed me my freedom. "Congratulations," she said. "You're officially a property owner." I nodded because if I spoke, my voice might crack. I had worked my entire adult life for that moment. Early mornings. Late nights. Saying no to vacations. Saying yes to overtime. Decades of swallowing stress so I could retire quietly, on my own terms. And now I had. The drive out was long and got quieter with every mile. Pavement gave way to gravel. Gravel gave way to dirt. Phone signal faded until it disappeared entirely, and I felt lighter with every lost bar. When the cabin finally appeared, tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering trees, I turned off the engine and just sat there. Wildlife grazed nearby like I didn't exist. No traffic. No sirens. No neighbors arguing through walls. Just space. Inside, the cabin was small. Perfectly small. One room, a modest bedroom, a bathroom you had to enter sideways if you weren't careful. The air smelled like pine and old wood. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, placing each object exactly where I wanted it. That first evening, I sat on the porch with coffee gone cold, watching the sun set over the mountains thinking, this is it. This is the life I earned. My daughter called to congratulate me. Her voice was warm, proud. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight for years. Then later that night, my phone rang again. "I need to tell you something," my son-in-law said. No greeting. No worms. Just that clipped, professional tone he used when he thought he was in charge. "My parents are moving in with you." I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "If you don't like it," he added flatly, "you can always come back to the city." The line went dead. I sat there staring at the darkened window, my reflection looking older than it had that morning. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I reached for a notebook. 40 years of engineering had taught me something very important. When someone assumes you're weak, you don't correct them with words. You let reality do the teaching. By sunrise, I hadn't slept. The cabin windows glowed pale gold as morning crept in, and I was still sitting at the kitchen table with my notebook open, pages filled edge to edge. Not angry scribbles. Calm ones. Lists. Questions. Arrows connecting ideas. People mistake silence for surrender. I've always found it's usually planning. I made fresh coffee and stood at the window while it brewed. Mist clung to the trees like something alive. Somewhere out there, the wolves were moving again, invisible and patient. I smiled faintly. They were better neighbors than most humans I knew. By mid-morning, I locked the cabin and drove back toward town. I wasn't running away. I was laying groundwork. The ranger station sat just outside town, modern but deliberately understated. Inside, maps covered the walls, migration routes, predator territories, warnings written in polite language that still managed to sound ominous. A ranger looked up from his desk. Sun-worn face. Calm eyes. Can I help you? I just moved out here, I said, letting my voice sound uncertain. I want to be prepared. That was all it took. He explained bears, wolves, food storage, scent trails. He spoke the way people do when they assume you're inexperienced. Slowly, confidently, with a faint edge of superiority. Perfect. Wolves usually avoid people, he said, tapping a map. But they can smell food from a long way off. Incredible noses. How far? I asked. Depends on wind and terrain. Miles sometimes. I nodded, impressed. Good to know. He handed me a pamphlet about keeping property clean. I thanked him genuinely. I wasn't lying when I said I wanted to be prepared, just not in the way he thought. From there, I stopped at an outdoor supply store. The kind that smells like leather and metal and old ambition. I told the clerk I wanted to monitor wildlife activity. Smart, he said, showing me motion-activated cameras. Lots of folks like to keep an eye on things out there. I bought 2. Cash. Back at the cabin, I installed them with care. One covering the driveway. One angled toward the porch. Hidden enough not to be obvious. Positioned for maximum visibility. Test. Adjust. Test again. The satisfaction was almost nostalgic. It felt like work. Real work. The kind that makes your mind quiet. The next day, I visited the butcher. I need scraps, I said. Fat trimmings. Organ meat. For dogs? He asked casually. Something like that. He wrapped everything quickly, no questions. The smell hit the moment I opened the cooler back at the cabin. Raw. Heavy. Impossible to ignore. I checked the wind. Always check the wind. Then I walked away from the cabin and placed the meat deliberately. Not close enough to feel threatening. Not far enough to be ignored. Calculated. I locked the cabin, turned the heat low, and left. That night, I drove back to my old house in the city. The one I hadn't sold yet. It felt hollow now, like a place I'd already moved on from emotionally. I set my laptop on the table, opened the camera feeds, and waited. At mid-morning, a sedan appeared. I recognized the posture instantly. Judgment. Discomfort. Ownership. They stepped out like they were inspecting something that had disappointed them. The woman wrinkled her nose. The man sighed heavily. At least it's free, he said. I leaned back and folded my arms. Then the wolves appeared. They moved like smoke through the trees. No sound. No urgency. The man's face drained of color. The woman froze, eyes wide. Breath caught somewhere between panic and disbelief. They ran. And just like that, the problem solved itself. When my son-in-law called later, his voice was stripped of authority and soaked in rage. You set this up. I live in the wilderness, I replied evenly. Wildlife exists. You baited them. I prepared my property, I said. Like any responsible owner. You're insane. I smiled at the wall. You're welcome to test that theory in court. The line went dead. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Because when people like him lose control, they don't back down. They escalate. And the next move wasn't about my cabin anymore. It was about my sanity. The first call came just after dinner. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the number. A distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. People don't suddenly reconnect out of love. They reconnect out of concern someone else planted. Hey, she said carefully. I just wanted to check on you. Check on me how? There was a pause. A practiced one. Well, your son-in-law called. He sounded worried. Said you'd been acting strangely since moving out there. Is everything okay? I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Ah, so that was the angle. I'm retired, I said calmly. I bought a cabin. I drink coffee and watch wildlife. If that's strange, then yes, guilty. She laughed weakly, unconvinced. He mentioned something about animals and cameras. Wild animals live in the wilderness, I replied. And cameras record driveways. Which part concerns you? Another pause. We said our goodbyes politely, but when the call ended, the quiet inside the cabin felt different. Sharper. Watchful. 20 minutes later, another call. Then another. Same script. Different voices. He's just worried about you. Living alone like that can affect people. Maybe you need some help. By the time my daughter called, I already knew what she'd say. Dad, why didn't you tell me about the wolves? I closed my eyes. They live here, I said gently. I didn't invite them. They were here long before I was. But you knew my grandparents were coming. Yes, I said. After they told me they were coming whether I liked it or not. Silence stretched between us. You could have made it safer, she said finally. You could have done something. I did, I replied. I removed myself. She didn't like that answer. We hung up with nothing resolved, and for the first time since moving out here, the solitude felt weaponized. Like evidence. Like something that could be twisted. That night, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Dates. Times. Exact words spoken. I wasn't panicking. I was preparing. The next morning, I drove into town to meet an attorney. He was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Let me lay out the timeline without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. They're not trying to move in anymore, he said. No, I agreed. They're trying to make me look unstable. He nodded. That's usually step one. He explained conservatorship. How accusations didn't have to be true, just repeated. How family members could claim concern while quietly circling assets. What do we do? I asked. We make you legally boring, he said. And untouchable. By the time I left his office, my path was clear. Trust documents. Independent oversight. Medical evaluations. Every loose end tied. That evening, my daughter called again. Her voice sounded tired. He's been talking about estate planning, she said. About putting everything into a family trust. I felt something settle into place. A final piece clicking home. When did he suggest that? I asked. A few weeks ago, she said. For tax reasons. He said it would help everyone. Of course he did. After we hung up, I sat at the table and stared at my notes. This wasn't about concern. This wasn't about family. This was about money. And desperation. I booked a medical evaluation the next morning. Comprehensive. Documented. Impossible to dismiss. When the doctor finished, she slid the letter across the desk. Healthy. Alert. Fully competent. I smiled. I thought so. 2 days later, a woman from social services showed up at my door. Clipboard. Polite smile. Careful eyes. We received a complaint, she said. Just a routine welfare check. I invited her in. Let her look at everything. Bills paid. Kitchen stocked. House spotless. When I handed her my medical evaluation, she raised her eyebrows. You were prepared, she said. I was warned, I replied. 3 days later, the case was closed. Complaint unfounded. Motivation questionable. I filed the paperwork neatly into a new folder. Then my attorney called. There's something else, he said. Mail. Not yours. I walked to the mailbox slowly, gloves on, pulse steady. 3 envelopes. Government agencies. Their names. My address. That's when the game changed. Because lying about someone's sanity is cruel. But committing fraud using their property? That's not manipulation. That's a crime. And once crimes enter the picture, everything shifts. I sat at the kitchen table that night, evidence spread out like a map of someone else's downfall. They thought they were cornering me. They had no idea I'd been building a case strong enough to collapse everything they touched. And I hadn't even reached the final surprise yet. I didn't rush. That's the mistake desperate people always make. They think speed equals strength. It doesn't. Timing does. I photographed every envelope at the kitchen table. Front. Back. Postmarks. Dates. I didn't open them. I didn't touch them with bare hands. Then I sealed them carefully and called my attorney. When he answered, his tone shifted the moment I explained. That's federal, he said. Benefits fraud. Possibly identity misuse. So we report it, I said. Yes, he replied. And once we do, there's no putting it back. I looked out the window at the trees swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. The cabin was quiet. Steady. Still mine. Then let's not put it back, I said. Things moved quickly after that. Faster than anything had so far. Federal investigators called. Calm voices. Precise questions. They already had more than I expected. My documentation helped. The cameras helped more. A week later, my attorney called again, and this time his voice carried something different. I found another issue, he said. Your daughter's house. My stomach tightened. What about it? There's a second loan attached to it. Taken out without her knowledge. I closed my eyes slowly. How much? He told me. The number wasn't what mattered. The betrayal was. When I called my daughter that evening, I kept my voice light. Do you mind if I ask you something? I said. About your mortgage. She laughed softly. That's his department. I barely look at it. That was my answer. I didn't tell her everything yet. Not because I wanted to protect him, but because I needed to protect her from shock before I could protect her future. The next few days were quiet on the surface. Underneath, everything was moving. Trust documents were finalized. Assets transferred. Beneficiaries adjusted. Everything done cleanly, legally, permanently. Then my son-in-law showed up. No call. No warning. His car came up the driveway too fast, tires spitting gravel like they were angry. He got out before the engine even stopped. I was on the porch, phone already in my hand. You think you're clever, he shouted, hiding behind lawyers. I think you're trespassing, I replied calmly. And you're being recorded. He didn't care. You set this trust up to punish me, to control my wife. I tilted my head slightly. I set it up to protect what's mine. You're cutting us out. No, I said. I'm removing you. That's when his voice cracked. Not anger. Fear. I'll take this to court, he said. I'll tell everyone you're unstable. I'll make sure you lose everything. I smiled then. Not wide. Just enough. You already tried that, I said. It didn't work. He stopped. That moment, right there, was when he realized the ground had shifted beneath him. He left without another word. 2 days later, the arrest happened. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even leave the porch. I watched the clouds roll in over the mountains and listened to the wind. Then my daughter called. Her voice was shaking. My grandparents were arrested, she said. They're saying it's fraud. Dad, did you know about this? I took a breath. Yes, I said. And we need to talk. In person. She came that weekend. I made her favorite lunch. Old habits die hard. She barely touched it. I laid everything out. Slowly. Carefully. Document by document. The secret loans. The missed payments. The fraud. The lies. She cried. She denied. She cried again. Then she went very quiet. He tried to have you declared incompetent, she whispered. Yes, I said. She looked at me like she was seeing her marriage for the first time. By the time she left that evening, she didn't hug me goodbye. She just nodded. Sometimes understanding hurts more than anger. 3 days later, my attorney called. Your son-in-law's house is in default, he said. The bank is selling the debt. I stared at the trees outside my window. How much? I asked. He told me. I didn't answer right away. Power isn't something you seek. It's something you accept when refusing it would harm someone you love. Buy it, I said finally. Quietly. When the paperwork was done, I sat alone on the porch again. The cabin was still. The woods were breathing around me. I hadn't planned revenge. I'd planned protection. But sometimes, protection looks an awful lot like justice. And the final move? That was still coming. The phone rang just after sunrise. I was on the porch with my coffee, wrapped in a sweater, watching fog lift from the trees like the forest was exhaling. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. They're moving in now, my attorney said. Federal charges. Fraud. Formal arrests. I closed my eyes, not in relief, just acknowledgement. Thank you for telling me, I said. An hour later, my daughter called. Her voice was steadier than I expected. Tired. Worn thin. But steady. He's panicking, she said. He just found out the bank won't let him sell the house. I said nothing. There's something else, she added. He says the loan was sold. That some company owns it now. I took a sip of coffee. Let the moment breathe. That company, I said gently, is mine. Silence. Then very quietly, you own our mortgage? I own the debt, I corrected. There's a difference. She came to the cabin the next day. No ruse. No drama. Just the sound of tires on gravel. And a woman stepping out of a marriage she finally understood. We sat at the kitchen table where all the evidence already waited. No surprises left. No missing pieces. I told her everything. How I'd bought the debt. Why I'd done it. What it meant. If the bank had foreclosed, I said, you would have lost your home. I couldn't allow that. She stared at the papers, hands trembling. So what happens now? That's up to you. I slid a single page across the table. If you leave him, legally, cleanly, I forgive the entire debt. The house becomes yours. Free and clear. She looked up sharply. And if I don't? Then I step back. I said. I won't punish you. But I can't protect you from what's coming. She didn't answer right away. She went outside. Walked the clearing. Stood where the elk usually passed through. When she came back in, her face was changed. I filed for divorce yesterday, she said. I just hadn't told you yet. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was still clenched. 3 days later, my son-in-law signed everything. The divorce papers. The waivers. The acknowledgments. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked empty. When he asked if he could keep the house, the answer was simple. No. Once the divorce was finalized, the deed transferred to my daughter. She chose to sell it and start fresh near me instead. A smaller place. Quiet. Honest. We painted walls together. Assembled furniture. Cooked dinners that tasted better than they had any right to. Healing is rarely dramatic. It's repetitive. It's shared meals and long pauses and learning how to laugh again. Months later, I attended the sentencing. I didn't have to be there. I chose to be. They stood smaller than I remembered. Older. Worn down by consequences. The judge was fair. Firm. Final. When it was over, I walked out without looking back. That chapter didn't need revisiting. Now most evenings, my daughter drives up the dirt road to my cabin. We sit on the porch in matching chairs. Watch the light change. Learn the patterns of the land. The wolves still pass through sometimes. So do the elk. Neither has ever bothered us. I didn't get the retirement I imagined. I got something better. A life defended with clarity. A daughter safe from manipulation. A home that remained mine because I finally stopped asking for permission. And the surprise? It wasn't the wolves. It was this. I didn't lose my peace. I defined it. And I kept it. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.